Okay, well, I think with that, we're pretty close to our full registration. So I'm going to kick us off. Today, we're going to be talking about Transportation for America's new reauthorization proposals, specifically how we can incorporate accountability into the program and interpret those rules into a fix-it-first federal program. So looking forward to talking about that with you all today. So I am Corrigan Salerno. I'm a policy manager with Transportation for America. Been with the organization for about over 2 years now, working primarily around our electrification work and tracking federal spending and how these programs have been implemented at the state level. Beth?
I'm Beth Osborne. I'm the interim president and CEO of Smart Growth America. It's a parent organization for Transportation for America. Smart Growth America pulls in all of the various parts of the built environment that create great communities. And so transportation is a huge part of that, but SGA as a whole also handles land use, development, and housing policy because transportation works better when it's coordinated with those things.
Thanks, Beth. And a little bit about Transportation for America. So, Transportation for America is a project of Smart Growth America, and we are a national nonprofit working to create a transportation system that safely, affordably, and accessibly connects everyone to jobs, services, and opportunities through diverse travel options. So, we do this work through advocacy, direct community support, such as technical assistance, and also through research and analysis and advocacy, working at both the state and federal level. So we do this work according to our three principles: safety over speed, fix it first, and invest in the rest. Safety over speed, we're talking about prioritizing safer design in our roadways such that people are put over the speed of vehicles. We're talking about fixing our infrastructure before building new capacity when we can hardly afford to maintain the assets we already have that are already overbuilt in many cases. And also, we're discussing our principles through the lens of investing in the rest. We focus on redirecting what funding we have towards more multimodal travel options to build out new ways to reach jobs and services through things like transit and active transportation. So, Beth, I want to just tee this up for you for a bit more about what our reauthorization proposals are really about.
Absolutely. Let's jump to the next slide. There are generally four priorities that you hear Congress talk about, elected officials talk about, and if you look at the U.S. code in Title 23 that oversees this transportation program, basically four areas identified. We focus a lot on three of them here. One is improving safety, two is improving the condition of our infrastructure, three is reducing congestion, and the fourth that we're not talking about in these slides is emissions reduction, but we have had a whole webinar and have a whole report that shows the way we're investing in transportation under the bipartisan infrastructure law is increasing emissions. And so that we'll just go ahead and give that a big X for fail, and we'll talk about the other three. In terms of safety, those who follow us know that we do a report called Dangerous by Design, and we have been seeing massive increases in the people walking who are struck and killed. 75% increase since 2010. The majority of them are happening on federally funded state roads. 45% chance for a pedestrian to be struck and killed fatally at 30 miles per hour. And most roads, especially state-owned roads, are designed for significantly higher speeds than 30 miles per hour. It's actually rather rare to find a state road that has a 30 mile per hour speed limit, much less be designed to keep people down to 30 miles per hour. It's usually designed for 10% or 10 miles per hour higher than the speed limit. And this is people walking. Our overall safety record is terrible. If you compare it against all our peer nations, wealthy industrialized nations, we are so far behind. You would think we belong as a part of the developing nations. In fact, when international organizations report on the progress of wealthy nations on roadway safety, they will actually include language that says, if you left the United States out, we're doing quite well. But with the United States in, they're doing so poorly, they drag the rest of the international community down. So we're failing in safety. And in terms of state of repair, we have a huge backlog to repair our roadways. We have a huge backlog in transit. We have a huge backlog in addressing bike and pedestrian safety deficiencies. We don't build as a matter of course for people who are outside of a car. So even the roads that are currently listed as in a state of repair often have no infrastructure for those outside of a car. And while most people see themselves as drivers, I like to point out that they are one flat tire away from being a pedestrian on a roadway that is designed to put them in danger. And so this is a problem we all face, whether we believe it or not. 75% of voters believe that we should be fixing existing roads before building new ones. And that's because that is basic, lowest level responsibility. We would roll our eyes, laugh, and scoff at anyone who did a home addition before they replaced a leaking roof. But that is the baseline of our federal transportation program and most state DOT efforts. After 30 years of our existing program that started in 1991 under what was known as ICE-T, we spent $1.5 trillion in federal taxpayer funds to move the needle on this. And if you, we're looking through the American Society of Civil Engineers report card recently, and we compared where we are today versus where we are in 2001. And basically for this enormous investment, including a historic investment in the last infrastructure bill from 2021, we have seen a shift from roadways getting a grade of D all the way to a D plus. And if you look at our bridges, they were a C then and they're a C now, no improvement. If pouring all this money into this existing program, we're going to have some impact, I think we would see it by now. We're not seeing it, and that's not because of lack of funding. It's for lack of prioritization of repair. And then investing in the rest. So we spent the last almost 75 years investing in a sophisticated highway system, and often then blowing out our roads to turn them into highways, even though the whole point of building an interstate system was we knew we shouldn't have highways through the middle of cities at grade level. That was always a bad idea because it is fundamentally unsafe. But we didn't invest in the rest of the system as we went along. And now it's time, we have a huge backlog in terms of providing people with the transportation options that they tell us repeatedly that they want. 71% of respondents to a poll we conducted said that the state should fund more transportation options. And this poll was made up overwhelmingly of suburban voters and then rural voters. City voters were a small percentage. It was rural and suburban voters that wanted to see more options. We fail to invest in those proposals or those sorts of investments because we think our goal is to reduce the congestion on the roadways. And the only way to do that is to dump almost all of our money into expanding those roadways every time they fill up. And that process has failed miserably. We did a study and we're currently updating it, looking at the largest 100 urbanized areas. And we looked at the trend of congestion from 1993 to 2017. And we found 100 of them saw an increase in congestion. That included cities and states that were not keeping up with population increases. So they weren't building enough new capacity to keep up with population. It includes areas that were building way more capacity than their population increase. And it included areas that were increasing capacity and losing population. This program that we all seem to love and has such bipartisan support has found a way to move fewer people slower with more infrastructure at a very high cost. And that's ridiculous. That is an utter failure to the taxpayer and something that we should not allow to continue. At the same time, prime real estate is are those places where you can walk and where you can take transit. Those are the places where the costs are the highest because we don't allow anyone to build it. And where they have built it, we're blowing out the roads and making it unwalkable and scary. It is time for this program to move into the 21st century and actually have the government supporting the market and not undermining it. So we're failing across the board in the outcomes we promised, and the outcomes we promised for over 30 years. Why? Why are we doing this? I'm going to turn it back to Corrigan to talk about the money side.
And a lot of the time, the reason that people give for the why we still do this, despite this failure to address these goals that we set out around our principles and the nation's 4 principles and goals that Beth initially outlined, is because we have a user pay system, and it also provides stability for the system over time and enables states to make those investments that eventually get them to those goals. But that in and of itself is not necessarily true. We're no longer at a user pay system for the Highway Trust Fund, and we have not been for a very long time. So we did some research recently and visualization of where we were at in terms of the Highway Trust Fund's balances and where our cumulative fund transfers have taken us. So far, we've put over $275 billion in general taxpayer funds in transportation since 2008, when initially we would have gone bankrupt if we had not done that as a result of the financial crisis back then, but also due to declining gas tax revenues. So it's not just that we are having to transfer in general funds, we're also still spending too much on our highway infrastructure to begin with. Road inflation has been devastating to the purchasing power of the gas tax, and we're seeing diminishing returns, as Beth had shown earlier, on the amount, the bang for your buck that you're getting out of this highway infrastructure. For every dollar that we're spending on congestion, we're seeing it costs more per dollar, costs more per mile to get these additional lane miles, and those lane miles are not adding to any efficiencies in the system. And further, if we look at where we're going to be in the next few years, we're projected to run out of money for the Highway Trust Fund in 2028. We're going to need to throw a couple more $1 billion into the Highway Trust Fund to make sure it's not insolvent, which we're legally required to have it be solvent. And we're coming up on a decision point, it seems, to many stakeholders that we're going to have to cut off some of the things that we consider that they might consider to be superfluous to the program, like transit, rail, and all these other programs. When in reality, the highway formula program itself is going to be spending well above where gas tax revenues are. And we've already found that the additional money from bringing EVs into the system would not solve this either. And despite that, you're seeing arguments from transportation stakeholders like AASHTO calling for even more spending under the Highway Trust Fund for federal aid highway programs, with even less accountability to the taxpayer and even greater spending from the general fund. There's no proposal right now for increasing the gas tax to meet the need for this spending gap, and there's also no proposal separately from us to actually make sure that we get to the right level of spending. So back to you, Beth.
So we are failing to get good outcomes. We're not paying our way, and the whole reason we have a trust funded program. We have user fees that come in the form of gas taxes, diesel taxes, some tire taxes, and a couple other random things, basically to create long-term stability. Long-term is stability in the program in order for states and metropolitan planning organizations and transit agencies to plan into the future, to know that funding will be there, and with the idea that if they can plan into the future, really take on big projects, then they'll produce better results. They're not producing better results. The user isn't paying, and we've actually lost a ton of stability. The Trump administration has started slowing down or reworking the scope of projects they don't like. To date, it hasn't impacted a lot of the formula funds that go out to state DOTs or metropolitan planning organizations and transit agencies, but it has hit discretionary funds. And a lot of the discretionary funds are the sorts of things that those who are skeptical of the overall federal program are very excited about. So we're not getting stability anymore, or not for the stuff that a lot of folks in who want to see a more up-to-date program are excited about. We don't have the funding we need to pay our way, and we're getting terrible results. They shouldn't get the luxury. Transportation shouldn't have the luxury of a trust fund anymore. They should have to go and fight out the funding they need along with everybody else, from housing to education, and prove that money from the taxpayer, limited dollars from the taxpayer going to state DOTs and MPOs and transit agencies is the best use of funds. If they did, I guarantee we would start seeing better results. Frankly, everyone is protected by the trust fund, and they are acting like it. They're acting protected and unaccountable. So we have proposals that could change that, but these are not meant to be proposals in isolation. And frankly, I want to be very clear. If we were not to see the full package of change, a real transformation in the program, we would rather not see a federal program than see this continued failure of a program limping along and stealing, basically our children's tax dollars to pay for stability in a failed program. So let's jump into those. We are principle of fix it first, and we'll have other conversations and webinars about safety over speed and invest in the rest, but today is about fix it first and accountability. So let's jump into it. Right up front, we want to make sure that people are understanding what we are accomplishing and what we aren't accomplishing. Even Politico seemed a little surprised by our statement, but we just don't think that this is functioning. We're not getting, overall as a nation, we're not getting infrastructure in better condition. So this program has failed, and we want to either tell the states to build a failed system on their own, or demonstrate real change. So one thing, just baseline. If you want to build something new or expand an existing asset, whether it be a highway or a bridge or whatever, you should have to demonstrate before getting to use federal dollars on that you have the asset, the capacity to maintain that new asset, that expanded asset throughout its useful life, while continuing to improve the condition of your overall system. If you can't do that, you shouldn't build something new. That is an irresponsible use of federal dollars. And I understand that everyone faces a ton of challenges across the board in terms of demand. But number one, you have to maintain what you have. You have to make it work well before you get to build new things. And we would also like to move to a world where we're not building out the system from scratch anymore. So let's provide an 80% match to repair the existing system, but let's bring that federal match down to 50% for capacity expansion. And maybe we even talk about going lower than that. But even at 50%, you don't get to build it with federal dollars if you can't show responsibly you can maintain what you're building while maintaining the rest of your system. We actually have a provision like that in transit. I would argue that probably needs to be tightened up too, but for some reason, highways are not required to be held to the same standard. Two, set targets to improve road and bridge conditions. I am going to repeat that. We should have a requirement that states and MPOs set targets to improve their road and bridge conditions. Why do I say that should be required? Because currently states and MPOs can and are setting a target, a public target, so that saying they want their roads and bridges, or they expect their roads and bridges to be in less good condition. Give them more money, don't tell them what to do with the funds, and they will deliver a worse product, is what they are telling us. That is highly concerning. We would also like to see the targets for off-system bridges. You know, people who are traveling want to know all the bridges that are that they might travel over are in good condition. And a lot of those off-system bridges, that's a misnomer. Those are bridges that the states don't see as their priority, and they still need to be in good condition. We also think that the bridge inspection standards are a little antiquated, need to be updated. It shouldn't just be going out and visually analyzing the conditions. There's a lot more knowledge and technology we have to analyze the condition of bridges. We can do a better job. We should. All right, moving on to the next one. We want to assist the states and MPOs that are failing to hit targets to improve things. And recognizing that they feel a lot of political pressure to build new stuff and have big events around the opening of new assets, we will provide a little constraint so that if they're failing to improve the state of repair of their roads and bridges, we would redirect federal funding solely to repair and take away some of the discretion that the states have to build new. Also, we would make sure that competitive grant awards were restricted to repair. So you couldn't use your formula dollars to repair and then go out for a competitive award to build something new while you're failing to bring your system into a better state of repair. And then we want to increase the planning accountability and transparency. Right now, if you want to find out what your state's investment plans are, it's very hard to find it. And you can't, it's very hard to compare your state versus other states. And some states have really beautifully laid out state transportation improvement programs, and others just don't. Some are searchable, some aren't. Some describe their projects, some don't. So we want the states and metropolitan planning organizations to provide detailed projected progress towards repair targets and explain which of the program funds are supporting that progress and how. And we want to make sure that you can go find all those planning documents in one place, available through USDOT. And be able to search them so that it is laid out clearly, consistently, and not only easily for you to understand that system, but also compare against other states and see who's doing the most with their money. And then we want a state of repair to include resilience for frequent disasters. It really is long past time that the states and MPOs identify which assets are vulnerable, determine which ones need to make it through common disasters in that area. And as they are bringing their system to a state of repair, it needs to include being able to withstand those natural disasters. And I think that gets me to accountability.
Yeah, and how we actually track all of these different investments, we're going to need, as Beth mentioned, all of these tips and different programs displaying states' plans for investment. There's really a wide variety of different ways that we've seen states display that information. I've personally gone through everything from a CSV file that was kind of poorly labeled to a PowerPoint to a PDF with columns everywhere. And it's really difficult to understand where money is coming from, where it's physically going, and for what goals. So we see that all of these different impacts really affect the state of the system when you don't have this level of accountability. So we worked to put together our State of the System data hub, which has a series of data for each part of our principles. So across our priorities of safety over speed, fix it first, and invest in the rest, we have data on each element of the transportation system from Federal Highways Transportation Performance Management System and other data sources. So in that data hub, we've noticed that we've really not had our investment connect with results. If we look at our interstate pavement conditions and targets across all 50 states, and this one, for instance, is just Alabama, we're still doing this thing, as Beth had mentioned, where states are setting targets that are below where they're actually already at in terms of infrastructure condition. So we're setting goals that allow us to go on a glide path to go to a worse outcome. And our infrastructure in the poor condition side, we're hoping that it gets worse before we start investing to do better. And if you look here at additionally on these national highway bridge conditions, it's kind of the same story where we're still worse off than we were several years ago. And even beyond that, if you actually look at the data we have, we're only able to get data in a lot of these federal sources through 2022. So there's still a need for that. But onto our actual policy recommendations, we recommend that we set a national goal for conditions and performance. This has worked really well in the past. We have an incredible interstate system in the United States, but now we're kind of building without a goal. These interstates that we are building and expanding today, and arterials and all the different types of roads that we are working on, are not really working effectively to reduce congestion or expand access to jobs. And instead, we are adding additional liabilities to the system, and while also allowing, in many cases, for the total conditions of the system that we already have that's working fine enough to get worse. So we believe that the U.S. system, the transportation program, should set a goal for conditions and performance to strive for into the future. We also think that these transportation improvement programs and long-range transportation programs should connect their investments with priorities and rework how those investments are justified on the project level to connect with target achievement, and also working towards those national goals. And when those states are actually hitting those goals, we want to see that on the flip side of having to help them when they're doing poorly, we can incentivize them to go about to use additional dollars if they're on the right track, and enable bonus formula funding for states that make progress towards goals that are ambitious, improving both safety and repair. And additionally, we want to connect those national priorities and investment data to the public on an easier basis. And we want to get a little bit more specific here. We're talking about making sure that the transportation improvement programs and state transportation improvement programs have all of the data that you need to understand what's actually occurring. If you look back into significant examples, like with what happened with former Caltrans executive Jeannie Ward Waller, you saw that state DOT in California was incorrectly labeling some of the work that they were doing that was restricted by their original funding source. It was a state funding source, but having requirements to display the exact type of work and include things like project documentation, location of the project, the amount of the type of modes served, as well as the total investment cost and goals, would direct these projects towards greater accountability. So that is just the start of our presentations on reauthorization priorities going forward. We are going to continue soon working on our safety over speed and invest in the rest priorities, and it's going to be coming up soon on June 18th at noon. You can register at a link that we're going to drop in the chat. But I also want to open it up now for questions for folks about our presentation and also our reauthorization priorities.
There were a few questions in the chat, which I've answered in writing, but I'm happy to elevate as well. We had one participant ask what the impact of funding bucket silos have on where state DOTs and MPOs can spend their money. And, you know, over the past 30 plus years, the program has been simple and got complex in terms of the number of buckets, and then got simplified again and then got complex. And we haven't really seen a difference in the outcomes on repair. So considering that we do have a bunch of buckets right now, but they are extremely flexible in terms of their eligibilities, and they are also extremely flexible in terms of your ability to take money out and shift to another program. I don't think the buckets are the problem. I think it is the priority of spending. There's also a question about rural areas and whether or not they can sustain transit. No, the local governments can't sustain it, but if we as a country decided and your state decided to prioritize it, they certainly could and should. And rural transit is essential for the life of those rural areas. And I just don't believe, like so many Americans do, that rural residents deserve less than urban residents. If you travel to very remote areas of very rural countries outside the US, they don't share that belief that rural residents deserve less and can't be moved around as efficiently with transit as urbanites. I think we have some new questions here. What feedback have we gotten from congressional offices? We've gotten a lot of curiosity. We've gotten a lot of openness. I'm surprised at how many people respond positively to the notion of just being fed up with this program and its inability to produce good results, and how all the flexibility that has been demanded at the state level has really not produced the results that were promised along with that flexibility. I've also been surprised at how many people have kind of just taken a position of maybe we don't really need a federal trust fund if this is all we're going to get. I really expected that I would be an outlier, and I'm not finding that we're as much of an outlier as I would have expected at the local level or at the congressional level. And I've had a bunch of people say to me before we made this position public, maybe it's just time for this program to end, at least in its current form. And they've almost been apologetic. That might be too far out there for you. And I've said, oh no, sounds like we're all coming to the same conclusion. And have I studied how other countries fund their transportation systems? Yes. Having a trust fund is unusual. Most countries do transportation funding. Well, depending on the size of the country, they do it through annual appropriations, but sometimes smaller countries are able to operate more the way states and localities are. And are able to do bonds and bond issues and things like that. But no, there are not a lot of trust funds out there. And again, their results are better. Their systems are in a better state of repair. Their safety just blows ours away. It is remarkable to me what laggards, what embarrassments we are. And we seem to be too ignorant, uncaring, I'm not sure what it is, to be embarrassed by it. So if they can produce such better results and move people around with more options, more efficiently, more safely, yeah, maybe we should just go to appropriations like everybody else does.
Mark, would you like to ask your question verbally?
Yeah, it's more information giving than question asking, but the question is about you guys using this information along with what you have to come up with a complete program that you can say, this is what it's going to cost to do what we want to do. This is what it costs to do it the way you're doing it now. So the things I'm talking about start with using a different kind of pavement. Instead of asphalt or concrete, using ultra high performance cement, which is in use around the world, has been for 20 years. And I was at a workshop in Houston with the Texas Department of Highways bridge repair team. And they were saying that because of the freeze-thaw cycle, if they do a repair for concrete spalling on a bridge abutment or something, they'll have to come back in a year and a half or 2 years and do it all over again. And the parting shot from the person who hosted that workshop was, if you do a proper job of preparing, of sandblasting the thing, and then then applying this stuff, you can come back in 50 years and see how it's doing. So the basic core message here is that you have a material which is ready to be put in use widely in the United States, and which is the compressive strength is 5 times higher than ordinary cement or ordinary concrete as a start, and goes up from there. And it's ductile and it holds water out.
All right, Mark.
So
Awesome.
then,
Yeah, there's a lot of smarter ways, definitely.
There's another piece along with that, which is the bridges. There is a structural geometry called the Bosch captive column, US patent 3501880. I'm an advisor to the family of the inventor, that is far stronger than the truss and can be mass customized in fabrication in a factory.
All right.
So that means
Appreciate it,
you can,
Mark.
I'm sorry, Mark. I
Yeah.
just want to make sure that everybody else has a chance to talk. I completely agree that there are materials and technologies that have not only are available to us, have been available to us for some time, that would produce much better results. But in an unaccountable system, there's no reason for anyone to try to use them. And that is what undergirds so much of what we're trying to say here. I have gone to things like TRB for decades. I have been part of reauthorization debates since the 90s. And I always hear about these things. And quite frankly, what's the point? You're going to get the same amount of money whether you produce good results or bad results. In fact, if you produce bad results, not only do you come up with a good case for more money, our roads and bridges are crumbling, we need more money, but also if you have to replace things more, there are folks that make money off of having to replace things more. And that's just some of the realities of the system. And that's why we want to bring some real accountability into it, so people discover the systems that would work better and have a longer term benefit to the public. Corrigan, what do you think we should jump into from here?
I think I see one on, I want to talk about what feedback we've gotten. I think we did a little bit of that, but just about from congressional offices. It kind of depends, obviously, a little bit on where they're coming from to begin with. But when it comes to feedback regarding our policy recommendations, offices genuinely want to hear more, I think, is what the main thrust of our conversations have been. Obviously, it's not the same for each office, but a good proportion of them are interested in seeing more information about how to actually get this into text. But again, I think a lot of these questions lead to this being a really big issue that is going to require a lot of brainpower and collaboration to get something into text on both a bipartisan basis and also with a lot of participation from stakeholders outside of Congress. But right now in this current reauthorization cycle, we're seeing a approach that's really led by the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee in a really narrow way, that's led by themselves rather than guided from external stakeholders. If you take a look at how some of this feedback is solicited, it's really right now being done in a way that only allows for small changes for individual programs or proposals that create new programs to fix or graft on to the existing system. No one is really thinking on a transformative basis when it comes to developing the next text for this reauthorization. And in many ways, even though there is this kind of groundswell of frustration with both the discretionary grant programs being a little arduous sometimes, but still getting some of the goals that people want, or the federal formula programs getting nowhere near their actual goals. I think there's a lot of general frustration, but that's not necessarily connecting in this version of reauthorization in this Congress. We're not doing the exact things that we need to do to actually get to that transformative new approach.
I would like to jump in there. There are a lot of predictable questions about certainty and the way things would operate. Most nations who produce better results than us do not have multi-year certainty and produce better results. So I don't think certainty is the cure-all. That was our proposal. That was our hypothesis decades ago, and we now have decades of results to see. And the facts don't bear out the hypothesis. It is incorrect. So if other nations can do it, we can do it. And it would not be a collection of or a call for projects at the national level. It would be just like we do everything else. We fund programs just like we do through reauthorization. So you would fund a national highway performance program, and it would go out by formula to the states. It's just every year we would look. And look, maybe you do it something more like the defense authorization. It's every 2 years. And it allows a more consistent look at what the taxpayer is getting for their investment. Right now, they're getting garbage. They're getting worse than garbage. They're getting damage. They're getting danger. They're losing time. They're getting inefficiency. They're having their kids' taxpayer dollars, future tax dollars, rated to build things today that are producing terrible results, harming communities. We shouldn't allow it. And one thing I found when I was on Capitol Hill was the 5-year reauthorization process, which always turns into a 6 or 7 year reauthorization process, is enough time for everyone who worked on the last authorization to be gone by the next authorization. So they're all a bunch of newbies, or overwhelmingly a bunch of newbies, who are unable to learn from the past mistakes. Again, we do it in defense. We do it in every sector except for transportation. All of our peer nations do annual or biannual appropriations. We can do it too. So I am not as concerned about it as others are. And one of the reasons I'm not concerned about it is throughout my entire career, I have seen the way the trust fund has played out, and that certainty has provided us all bad results. Everything's gotten worse. And if that's what certainty gets us, then I don't want it. I'll also point out that politically, this next reauthorization, as Corrigan showed with the funding, is going to be unbelievably difficult. Everyone is yada yadaing this thing. They think that, oh, Congress will figure it out. But the deficit is gigundous, and it's going to be coming off of a reconciliation that we're doing this year that's going to create massive, massive deficits. This bill is going to be hard to do no matter how bipartisan it is. And even if we were getting good results, it is quite possible. It is way more possible than anyone is admitting yet that they will not be able to get a bill done, period. That will go into a year extension, maybe another year extension, then start doing very, very short-term extensions because they have to come up with more money. And then it could become an annual appropriation process just for lack of ability to come up with the additional massive deficit spending needed to keep this thing going. So people will pretend that's not the case. In 2 years, when everybody realizes it, remember I said it. Corrigan, what else you got?
Cool. I think we've got a good one from Todd. Has there been any discussion about how to fund the right sizing of roads in order to decrease maintenance costs over the long run? So I think there's a couple ways that we could connect the investments that we're making to those the overall liabilities of our roadway system. It helps that we have a federal research report that comes out every few years called Conditions and Performance Report that explicitly lays out how much it costs to bring us to that state of good repair. So one of the ways that we could be funding the right sizing of roads is by making sure that we're aligning our investment priorities with a fix it first approach. States already are reporting to federal highway transportation asset management plans that in many cases include investment scenarios that would reduce the amount of total liabilities they have by directing more funding towards the repair of their existing assets from roads and bridges and tunnels and by doing so, they would actually reduce the overall long-term maintenance needs. If you look at the conditions and performance report, some of the greatest increases in the growth in assets that need to be repaired happens over the next 10 years. And that's because assets are falling into disrepair actively, even as you're repairing it. So by increasing the amount of investment we have in repair, we're reducing the amount that we have to repair 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And so really getting towards that fix it first approach is how we would do that. And we could use either connecting that funding from these programs and reports from Federal Highway or taking a look at things like the transportation asset management plans.
And Todd, I love this question because you're right. So many roads are overbuilt. We will have further conversations about how to modernize this program, which includes tools that would push to have roads that are designed to meet their needs rather than designed to meet the wildest potential traffic loads that might occur in 20 years, like the current approach does. So I really appreciate the question. And I remember having a conversation a few years ago with someone who didn't like that we talked about fix it first, because they were saying they don't want to fix what we have. What we have is substandard. It's not appropriate. Sometimes it's overbuilt. Sometimes it is not designed properly. We want it to be better when we fix it. And we agree. And so we want to have tools and rules that lead us towards more appropriately designed and sized infrastructure. So again, thanks for that question.
Well, we have another question here about how can the private sector
further. How do we get rid of it? Well, I was also going to say, I like this person who took it further and said, what about eliminating assets no longer needed? We do totally agree. Why would we replace something that we no longer need? That's a great question and a tricky one. We also will talk about repairing damage and looking for ways to reconnect communities and remove assets that don't make sense and things like that. But this is an area that needs a lot more discussion. And when I was at USDOT, we participated in a multi-agency discussion about how to handle infrastructure needs and overall economic development needs in shrinking communities. All of our programs at every level of government is designed for growing communities. And we've done a terrible job of addressing the needs of areas losing population so that it can be, livable and beautiful, even at the smaller size, rather than full of these kind of, monuments to its past that's too expensive for the current population to maintain. And then Corrigan, I think you were going to bring up a question about private sector.
Yeah, that, and also I see a great one after that. So we'll get to we'll start with the private sector question. So how can the private sector participate more in this process? I think that depends on what kind of stakeholder you are, because there's a lot of private sector representation for certain elements of the program that have a really good representation on the Hill. I'm thinking specifically to stakeholders like the American Road and Transportation Builders Association. But depending on where you are in the private sector, there's a couple different interest groups that work on that behalf. And oftentimes they can be well represented, but depending on what kind of stakeholder we're talking about, that might depend. So I need a little bit more clarification to give you a more in-depth answer there. But then also see a question from an anonymous person. So when looking at the policy landscape, what do we see as the most promising mechanism for spearheading and ultimately accomplishing these changes? Based on initial conversations, are there avenues from Congress, or is it something from the White House, USDOT, or groundswell from state and local? So to answer that, we think that there could be an opportunity to really move policy from both the very progressive side and also the very conservative side, because this is a program that is not hitting a lot of progressive policy goals, but also it's not hitting a lot of fiscal conservative priorities or even their own policy goals themselves about what our roads should cost us to actually accomplish the mobility goals that we have over time. So we think that it's going to take some maybe unconventional partnerships between people in Congress and also between advocacy stakeholders. But one thing that we really definitely would need is more people to really get on board with this idea that the system is not working, and that adding additional graphs onto this is not going to fix these overwhelming problems with the system and with accountability. And also, yes, exactly, anything with regards to good governance that we can expect. See some other questions in the chat. Has there been discussion? Okay, so we have to dismiss that one. And has T4A considered seeking support from other aligned organizations like the American Planning Association or et cetera, that might be considering a similar policy approach? And kind of going into that same question, we're working to build coalitions around support for this type of transformative approach. Beth, I don't know if you'd like to add on to more to that.
Yeah, organizations like APA are not really built to be advocacy organizations. And one thing that sets Transportation for America apart from organizations like that is, while we do have members, we are not a membership organization made up of a field or a group of like engineers or something like that. Those sorts of organizations can be very powerful. They're powerful both in terms of being great peer-to-peer organizations and learning and updating the state of the practice. And if they are able to come to an agreement, it means that that's a really strong agreement. But you don't go to those organizations to push for big change, because they can only move as fast as their most status quo member. We're different. When people become members of Transportation for America, they are signing on to our approach and they're backing it. If anyone is interested in membership, please let me or Corrigan know. Reach out to us. We're happy to give you information about it. There's a lot of information you get that others don't get from us about action around the country, and you get to do peer-to-peer work with other folks from MPOs and transit agencies and chambers and things like that across in cities across the country that are interested in updating this program, getting better results. But if at any point they can't keep up with the pace of our change, they move on, and we keep steady ahead. So we do struggle sometimes with those bigger organizations being able to do that work with us. We do find that we often work with many of their members quite well. And I think they find us very useful to be able to bring up some of these issues and be provocative and start a good conversation within that industry. I will also say that some of our partners out there are afraid of change as much as the folks that love the status quo. And so they are supportive of keeping everything that is failing in the program so long as they get a little program. So we get a little program for climate or safety or whatever it is. We'll ignore the fact that our 2% of the funds is not enough to make a dent in anything. And we'll also ignore the fact that the other 98% of the program is undermining our priorities. We're not willing to do that. We're not willing to take that payoff. We want the outcomes. And a little bitty program is not going to fix anything. I know that from 30 plus years of watching that hypothesis play out and fail. And so maybe with your help, the folks who are on this call, giving some of those organizations a push to say we'd rather go into the unknown than continue to hobble along accepting little crumbs of funding while the overall programs are causing damage, that maybe they'll feel comfortable making that leap with us. I will say that in terms of individuals, elected representatives, I really thought I'd get a lot more pushback than I am. Instead, I'm getting a lot of interest and people taking a position of, oh, finally someone's saying it. So there's more of an appetite out there for it than folks realize. And something I don't think that some of the status quo groups like AASHTO or ARTBA or even APTA understand, the Trump administration messing with people's competitive grants is really pushing people closer to us. If the stuff I care about doesn't have the certainty of everybody else, why should I cover them to get their money? That kind of bitterness is really starting to come through.
All right, folks. So it looks like we're about out of time. And
I'll just jump in. We did get a question about Amtrak and rail. And I did just want to say that we will have a future webinar on our proposal specifically on rail. There is more to come. This is part of a series. We have a whole conversation to come on safety, on modernization, on EVs, on transit, on rail, on AVs. There's a lot to talk about still. So if you if you were excited about this, we'll make sure that we share with you all the opportunity to participate in those future webinars and dig in deeper on other topics. And if in looking through this, you think we missed something, we're all ears to add to it. Again, this is not a menu of options for folks. This is a wholesale change that if we aren't going to see wholesale change, we would rather just walk away from the failures of this 1980s era program. So anyway, thanks everyone for joining us, for participating, for asking hard and provocative questions, for your enthusiasm and your continued support. And again, if anybody is interested in learning more about membership, please do reach out. We have a great membership program. We'd love to have more of you involved.
Thanks, folks. And yeah, just to echo in the chat, we are going to be sharing out a recording of this webinar to the email you used to register.